Hello and welcome. Just checking that was recording. Northstar here with another Singularity Let's Play. Now I don't know why you folks watch this game. I don't know if it's for the things I chatter about, if you like the game itself, if it's something to zone out to. I haven't really seen comments, many of them. I've gotten one on I think all the Let's Plays, maybe two for this game. Someone asking how I had so many logits, and I think there may have been one other question. So if you folks want to let me know why you enjoy watching these videos, if you're watching them, let me know in the comments. I'd like to know. It also helps the YouTube algorithm pick up on my channel a little more. I know if some of you folks come from other Let's Play series, maybe are looking for the updates on what's going on with those, or random scores across YouTube, or you like hearing some of the random, sometimes political things I sometimes talk about while playing this clicker game because it's so mindless that my mind wanders to whatever. I really don't know what it is you folks like, so let me know. As for this time, I don't really have anything political on my mind currently of much note. I guess I will say, if any folks don't watch it, there's a podcast series by a guy does Second Thought and Hakeem and someone else. I forget what it's called. You look it up. Um, the D program, I think. Um, if you want something political, that's they do podcasts and they just kind of joke around a lot. If you look at him, they always start with a preview of some of the funniest moments, and they always say ridiculous, zany things, mocking like racists and fascists and stuff by pretending for a second to take the stuff seriously in a, I don't know, it's a very, it can be off-putting if you don't understand it, when you immediately see that they're joking and mocking these people. They are leftists, so they have nothing but disdain for the alt-right. So if you want some politics, check them out. As for me, right now, shout out to my other Let's Play series. I'm trying to work up the energy to do a Hearts Iron 4 video, my America thing. I probably will at least pop over there, and I just took an Army Spirit in that game that lets me update a bunch of my division designs for free. At least certain changes can be made for free. So I've been off camera doing some of that, not boring you folks. So I'll always probably try and check some things. I'm almost done with it, but make sure check for certain inconsistencies that could cause me problems later. The number of men in training versus exercise versus non-exercise divisions. I have like special infantry only exercise divisions that also infantry only divisions can train faster. And you probably have no idea what I'm talking about if you don't play that game. As for this, I am doing challenge mode in the deep sea exploration. Starts off in the sunlight zone, then you advance the twilight zone, the midnight zone, the abyss, which is the C4 actually, except for trenches and troughs, which are called the trenches. And then you kind of work your way back with a few nodes back to surface to look at stuff like upwelling, which is important, very important to Earth's climate systems and such. It's an interesting exploration, especially for someone who has a biology background. Some of you may wonder, because you hear me talk sometimes medical and clinical research stuff, and I say I have a biology background. That's because people who want to become physicians or do clinical research, they often start with studying biology, like the broad sense, which includes a lot of like ecological climate system stuff as well as laboratory microscope cell biology kind of stuff, and then you specialize as you go into grad school and you start actually doing more medical science specific stuff. When you're an undergrad, there's like distribution requirements and stuff and such across different disciplines of biology as a bio major. Not every pre-med is a bio major. Some study like English lit and stuff, which is ridiculous and does nothing to help them as physicians except make them a more well-rounded human. And that's important, but you can take classes in literature as a bio major. There's no prohibition on it usually, most schools. Although you only have so much time in your college years. Honestly, really, college should be 5 years, and there should be more distribution requirements and such. It's probably not popular opinion. College has to be subsidized and cheaper, and this should be partly so that our engineers and scientists actually have more of an understanding of the culture and are more well-rounded human beings who understand their moral responsibilities. That would not work for the ruling class. Here I am getting political again. Who, kind of control everything and want to just have engineers make weapons for them without thinking about the implications, and scientists maybe develop nukes and stuff. I mean, not anymore. Now it's an engineering thing. Originally it came out of physics. But they want scientists and engineers to make weapons for them and not think twice, the ruling class, not think of how like AI advancements can hurt people under capitalism, which is not to say AI is innately harmful, because it's not, unless we start getting to AGI and robot slavery kind of stuff, which is very far in the future. But how a society uses technology is dependent on its culture and its economic system, of course. And capitalism will invariably use AI advances to unemploy people and depress the cost of labor. I know you get some nonsense. People saying, oh, but there'll just be more jobs from higher productivity. In theory, if there were unlimited natural resources on the planet, higher productivity would just lead to a bigger economy overall, but we are already hitting the natural resource constraints of Earth, with climate change already posing existential threat, and that only becomes worse if we exploit even more of the natural resources that remain, which are already being overexploited, and we're running out of certain things. So higher productivity could allow the same size economy with a smaller population. That is, if you have depopulation occurring. But that doesn't tend to happen naturally unless you have a government that's pushing the line of people having fewer kids, or so depriving large segments of the population of their life necessities that they don't have kids, which is the path we're going on. Otherwise, productivity goes up and natural resources constrain the economy from growing further. You just see unemployment and wages go down, or at least not grow when they would have otherwise. Which is the thing. People say, oh, well, wages went up, so technology wasn't hurting people. No. If technology hadn't increased productivity, it's very possible that wages would have instead gone up during that time. Because even at a constant technology level, you can see increasing demands for labor as people build factories, and the more factories and the more factories, for instance, at least until you hit natural resource limitations. There are some things that are less resource intense and thus can have more growth still. It's very few industries have hit their true maximum size limit. Some are as big as they can get until other sectors of the economy grow further. It's not so much that we can't grow further, it's that growth is going to slow down as we're approaching the carrying capacity of the planet. We're not there yet, but we're getting close enough that growth is slowing. Of population, of the economy, of all these things. Carrying capacity is, of course, a biological concept. It says all species, including humans, only a certain number of individuals can be sustained by a given ecosystem. While technology can, when we look at humans, can be thought to enhance the carrying capacity of Earth, it technology gets slower and slower for the same amount of progress. It becomes more expensive essentially as the low-hanging fruit is picked, and not everything is like computer technology, which is one of the few things that, because it's relatively new, hasn't really seen all the low-hanging fruit completely harvested yet, so to speak. That's a low-hanging fruit is a metaphor to do with some discoveries are easier to make than others. They require less experimentation, less grunt work to actually, less thinking, less analysis to make. And also, some discoveries are higher impact than others. As the easier and higher impact things are discovered, science becomes less and less cost effective, and less is invested in it often, or at least investment starts to level out instead of continuing to grow forever, because people choosing whether to invest in science see this declining ROI, return on investment, and decide they're going to not keep investing more and more in science. Unless you get like kind of a Cold War situation, which the U.S. is starting a second Cold War. China has started to actually re-up its science investments again after a period of stagnation and not investing in science. And that's a way to compete with China. It's for pride and prestige, not really for economic cost effectiveness. And to not be left behind. But anyways, my point was, as scientists and engineers should have an understanding of things like fields like sociology and psychology and history and literature, and there's just not enough time for that in a 4-year college education. Well, people can technically sometimes do dual degrees and occasionally get a 5th year if they're taking 2 bachelor's degrees. Be allowed that. It's uncommon, and they can't always get the financial aid they need to do that. It's discouraged. So that shouldn't be the case. And especially people who become our physicians should have understandable science and the humanities. Although I would argue that scientific knowledge is more cost effective, so to speak. You can add more value to how useful of a physician you'll be with your science classes than humanities. That's not to say humanities is unimportant, but it's slower. You have to study for many more years to get the same level of benefit. But it shouldn't be either or. They really both are extremely important. And so I don't think pre-med education should be just 4 years undergrad, but that's my view. There's a lot of evidence to support it. This isn't really a two-way forum. I can't debate you folks very easy here. And until my channel is big enough, I can like interview people and debate them on these kind of topics. Right now, no one would probably take an interview request because my channel's tiny. I can't really have an impact on these discussions in society. But anyways, people who are pre-med kind of thing, they start off with, often undergrad degrees, or they're going to come clinical research, get like a PhD in biomedical research, clinical research, those kind of things. You start off often with just a general bio degree, or a specific, you may have a specialization or concentration. I did. That was more genetics. But even that's a very broad field. And like when I went to grad school, I ended up specializing in like stem cell and viral genetics, which is something even more focused than just genetics. In fact, genetics is often lumped in with cell biology or developmental biology. So you don't even, as an undergrad, you don't even just study genetics. And of course, there's like environmental genetics, there's medical genetics, there's a lot of different kind of applications in some fields of genetics. Medical genetics isn't a subfield exactly, but and you have a genetics background, you could take it more in terms of studying cell biology for often medical, pharmaceutical purposes, because you need that basic knowledge of genetics often to find the right enzymes to target for pharmaceutical agents. So it's at the very beginning of the kind of pyramid of knowledge that leads to new drugs being developed. Genetics, improved understanding of genetics improves our understanding of enzymes, which improves our understanding of biochemical processes, especially understanding what things upregulate or downregulate a gene, so what its expression that is. And stuff like DNA methylation, acetylation. Anyways, but yeah, like I could have taken genetics background into looking more at like genetics of animals and nature and kind of ecological genetics, or I could have taken it in the direction I did, which is more medical. And then within more medical, I mean, there's viruses and there's regenerative medicine. These are very different things. I started off in regenerative medicine, and when I was in a lab that ran out of money, I switched into viruses because you can't always do what you want to study. Sometimes you just have to go where there's funding or where there's labs in your university that have funding specifically. Because there may be labs at other universities that have the funding, but in your field, but not unless you're going to switch to a different grad school, which is much tougher than switching as an undergrad. And then I worked as an EMT for a while after grad school, after having a master's degree. I had the option of doing a PhD, and I should have probably done it, but I started getting ready to apply med school very soon after my master's. I had planned to even start prepping for that in grad school, but I had some drama with my program shutting down, having to kind of rush out my thesis, and the first lab shutting down that meant I couldn't divert attention to that while I was in grad school. I had to focus on just getting my research done, getting through the program. Master's is short and PhD, so I thought I'd apply to med schools right away and hopefully get in and not screw around, but I got screwed. One of the things, I had a professor in grad school who messed with grades in one of the classes, and because the master's was a research degree, I didn't take that many classes, so actually the guy was doing research under us, so screwed me over. He didn't like having me in his lab very much, and so I took the class he taught, which is a common thing with grad students. He gave me actually very low grades, and he made the argument I should know the stuff better than everyone else in the class because I was doing it for research. Some professors, you take the classes and you're in their lab and they actually go easy on you. This guy was the opposite. He expected way more of me. What would have gotten an A for anyone else got me like a C. So that screwed up my GPA. That and another professor gave me grief just because he didn't like me. Intention messing with being unfair in exam grading. Grad school is a lot of like not multiple choice things where you might be writing a kind of a short essay on something, complex topic. So there's a lot of leeway for subjectivity or personal bias, which is what there was here. So with my grad school grades not being like straight A's, which med schools want, I was having a lot of success, even though I got an amazing MCAT score. So I worked as I tried to work as an EMT immediately, but I was stuck in a rural area. I had no money because I borrowed as little student loans as I could. I was so terrified of accumulating too much debt, but I had no savings, and I couldn't afford to move to a city to apply to jobs in it. I expected family would let me stay with them when they lived near a city, but then they didn't. And I got stuck in a rural area. I worked some shitty jobs, so I might just move to a city, moved near a city, retrained as an EMT. I took an EMT course. I'd actually taken one many years earlier before grad school, but not had time to keep up with continuing ed, and so that certification expired. So I took another EMT class, did all over again. Of course, pass. It's even easier the second time. It's never a particularly hard thing, honestly, to get an EMT cert. Probably should be harder. Although, first, your average EMT It's a little harder. I'm smarter than average, so it was easier for me. um, a lot smarter than average. It was, as a child, I was proven that I was a genius with IQ tests. There's a reason for that, and that was someone trying to debate my intelligence that I was unintelligent. It was just bullshit. So IQ tests showed I was in the genius range, and that shut this person up. What it really was is I had an abusive family situation, and so I was like not paying attention in school as like an elementary schooler because I was stressed out about home stuff, which is a common thing for kids who have really abusive families. And my father was pretty abusive, and it was bad. And anyways, to my mom, like, even after she divorced him, he was still kind of in my life and causing issues. But so in elementary school, I did IQ tests and I showed, or was it elementary or early middle school? Anyways, I was young. I was like 10, 11. I took IQ tests and I showed I was genius range, very solid genius range. So literally actually higher than that particular test could measure, because it was designed to, based on the drama, to focus more on the lower end of the range. So it did go up into the genius range, but not to the very highest levels of it, because that wasn't what this particular test was focused on. And so I was literally off the charts, but off the charts only means high genius. It doesn't say, it's not like it was something that was focused on ranking, the 100 smartest people of a generation or something, where it would be very focused on getting the exact score in the high end correct and being able to measure up to extremely high values. Point being, EMT retraining was a breeze for me in terms of academics. There's still stuff you have to like learn about, like teamwork, and especially this training program really emphasized teamwork and working with a partner. And a lot of the people it takes this course kind of screw-offs with very different life experiences, so it was a little bit tough in that way. Not that I didn't manage. Worked as an EMT. Heard from a coworker, a very smart one. This guy probably also, I don't know if you ever took an IQ test, but probably would qualify as a genius, and he was a pre-med who was doing it for the clinical hours, kind of like I was. So we worked together. We got along really well. He recommended, so I had two growers that was very smart like that in a pre-med that I really got along with. I had a few others, very different backgrounds, and Amon, of all people, kept trying to talk to me about something. I'm like, shut up, dude, I'm not converting. But he did at least teach me some more about a religion I knew nothing about, so, less likely to be, like, afraid of Muslims. There's a lot of demonization of them that goes on. And at least understanding another culture is good. I had a coworker who was, like, middle-aged former housewife, divorced, who lost everything in a divorce. I had a lot of strange coworkers, and these were the people I really got along with. For other people who were just young and wanted to party all the time, they didn't like me. But anyways, of one of the very smart coworkers who was a pre-med I had, he was applying to special master's programs. He said I should consider applying to them. I'm like, this sounds expensive and like a wasteful boondoggle. I was like, no, it really helps get into med school. So picked out a couple, applied to them, got into one, the more prestigious of the two. So looking back, I think it may have been because I slightly mishandled some emails with the less prestigious one when they asked some questions. Maybe I think they caught me a bad day. I was going back and cleaning out emails and looking some conversations like, oh, maybe that's why I got in the more prestigious program, because I seemed a little gruff when I was answering questions to the other one. Got into the program. I bragged about, well, almost everyone who gets a high GPA in the program gets into med school. Great. I got a straight 4.0. I was doing amazing. final semester, I got COVID. I had gotten COVID once before, and multiple infections increases your risk of long COVID and often severity if you get long COVID. I think I explained in a previous video, the prevailing theory is that it seems to be now, or at least the theory with the most evidence, that's probably kind of an autoimmune disease where repeat infections with COVID, especially, or really severe one, it sensitizes your body to antigens that can cross-react with self, that is with your own tissues, and that can lead to a kind of autoimmune inflammatory condition, which is what long COVID probably is. Your body's probably attacking its own capillary beds, and lungs and heart a little bit. Leads to multi-system organ dysfunction because capillaries are important in every organ in the body. But the lungs are particularly severely affected. I think one of the theories I saw is that antibodies against the ACE2 receptor can end up reacting with your lung cells and your capillary beds. And so if that's true, they'll probably need to develop a regimen of immune suppressant drugs for long COVID, which will come with, probably make the disease a lot less severe, or even effectively allow people to go back to normal lives if it works well enough, but it'll also come with being like someone who's immune compromised and not being able to like do a lot of normal things because you have to stay away from sources of infections. So not really a normal life, but without, I don't know if that turns out to be what it is. That's the state of how we can treat those kind of diseases. We have not. There's promising leads in treatments that can wipe out B cells that produce autoantibodies so you don't have to be on immune suppressant drugs your whole life, but it's pretty early research and the government won't put enough money in to develop it. These one-time therapies, probably because the pharmaceutical companies make a killing off selling immune suppressant drugs to people over a lifetime for chronic diseases. So it's kind of like there's more money in a treatment than a cure situation. Of course, then the government doesn't want to properly recognize long COVID as a disease because the treatment is very expensive, and if people with long COVID are disabled, then the government ends up paying through Medicaid for this, and they'd have to increase Medicaid funding. There's no way the meager amount they put in now could pay for immune suppressant drugs for like 4 million people in America, or 5. I forget what the exact number of severe to moderate long COVID cases is now, and there's people with even mild forms who might want to do those drugs too, depending on how severe the side effects are of those drugs, whether it be worth it. 4 or 5 million people on those drugs would decimate the Medicaid budget. We would have to double, triple, quadruple funding, and the U.S. government does not want to do that. So they suppress news of long COVID. They erase disease. It's constantly in the news, but the articles somehow never manage to get decent numbers of views, and they're always on back pages. And there's evidence of political pressure to keep it that way. To give kind of your less skilled reporters the job of reporting the less famous ones and put it on the back pages and put it online but never on the front page and that kind of thing. Since it's like that in a number of countries, there's some imply maybe kind of the capitalist ruling classes in multiple countries are colluding to not properly recognize this disease. As sinister as that sounds, but we're not talking the whole world. We're talking like NATO countries, the U.S. and its allies, basically. I'm sure some country will come out and break this cycle eventually. Some other country that's not a U.S. ally. I don't know. The U.S. is the evil empire these days. We are the bad guys, so it's not surprising. Of course, this is an early theory. It could turn out to be bunk as well, that it's like an autoimmune thing, but I mean, just like the viral persistence theory turned out to be not at all the case, because Not because there isn't viral persistence in people with long COVID, because there is. There's still some COVID virus particles in tissues, and there's evidence of even a little replication, like some relatively immune privileged parts of the body. So there's still a little bit of COVID virus, probably somewhere in my gut. It's not nearly enough to be contagious. But this was also found in healthy individuals who didn't have long COVID, who had been infected with COVID in the past, who had made a full recovery. That is to say, it's not distinctive. It can't be the cause of long COVID, because then the healthy individuals, they would also have long COVID, and they don't. So there has to be, but autoimmune could be that the viral persistence is triggering an autoimmune response that would make it worse. So it could be related, but it can't be the cause, is what I'm saying. We'll see if the autoimmune theory pans out. These theories are not being investigated very quickly because of lack of government funding. It's not a priority for the U.S. government, and the U.S. is probably pressuring allies not to make it a priority for their research programs either, which is stupid, horrible, and evil. But what do you expect from like a government that's been led by Trump and Biden? These people are conservatives and neoliberals of the worst sort, not interested in the public well-being or the public good at all. It's not like they're a Bernie Sanders type. Not that he's perfect. And the pressures of capitalism means even if you try and do the right thing, you'll get like crushed by the billionaires if you do, which is why capitalism is the problem, not a specific party or politician. Because capitalism is what generates billionaires. They would not exist under socialism ever. I mean, you see it in China, but that's because China introduces capitalist elements into its system so it can get foreign investment. If all the other countries in the world were socialist, or most of them, they wouldn't need to do this. It only has to do this to compete in a world that's mostly capitalist. Although that may eventually destroy whatever level of socialism exists in China, because capitalism is like a cancer, and you let a little of it into your society, and pretty soon it undermines everything, which is what may be happening in China. They right now they regularly put the worst behaving billionaires to death in China, but at some point you may get a leader who relaxes the efforts to control criminal activity by billionaires, because that's basically like if a billionaire breaks the law bad enough, they'll be killed. They're much harsher on them than ordinary people, as they should be, because billionaires rarely get caught and can do immense damage with what seem like small crimes, but they're not with the amount of resources they have. Price fixing, that kind of thing, it can hurt immense numbers of people. You get a future Chinese leader who doesn't keep the billionaires in check, and very quickly the whole system can become capitalist. And that's probably what will happen if they don't double down on return to socialism, like China's released documents and had meetings and stuff that have publicly declared they're intending to do that. But if they fail to do it, they'll probably fail to keep any socialism alive in China. This is probably part of the reason the U.S. hasn't attacked China yet either, is because we're waiting to see if socialism collapses. If it doesn't manage to save the socialist project, then the U.S. will probably try to invade China, because we know eventually they'll become strong enough that we can't attack them and hope to win. So the U.S. government will try and provoke China into a war before China is strong enough to actually win the war. And strength isn't just economic strength that allows you to fund things like military industrial complex research and build capacity, but it takes decades of high funding in military research to actually reach kind of anything like the level of the United States. So even if China's military budget was suddenly the same size as the U.S., and it's not yet, it would still take decades for them to catch up in military strength. There's a window where the U.S. can attack China even if Chinese economy eclipses the American one, and that's probably what the U.S. ruling class is betting on. Of course, they're not betting on that much of the world will side against the U.S. if we do this, because no one's going to believe China's really the aggressor if we provoke a war over Taiwan or whatever. At this point, everyone's onto our bullshit, as they should be. The U.S. has supported how many genocides in its history? The Indonesian genocide, the Bangladeshi genocide. Gaza could call it a genocide, could call it just ethnic cleansing, but it still killed probably 200,000 people when we get accurate death tolls, because right now the death tolls are like less than half that, just because we don't know how many people have actually died. Because the ability to count the deaths collapsed a long time ago. You know, at some point the numbers stopped really increasing. It's not because people stopped dying. It's because the ability to count the deaths kind of collapsed. And on top of that, there's secondary deaths to like disease, starvation that are due to the war, but people won't blame Israel. So that's a genocide or ethnic cleansing. More properly, since it isn't yet an attempt to wipe out Palestinians, we technically categorize as an ethnic cleansing. But it's reaching the level of genocide if Israel keeps doing stuff like this over and over until there are no more Palestinians alive. That would be genocide. Let's see. And in Congo, there's a ethnic cleansing genocide. Actually, this one would be qualified as a genocide because there's attempts to wipe out entire ethnic groups entirely already. So there's a genocide in the Congo that almost never gets talked about that the U.S. is indirectly funding. Indirectly by way of corporations in the United Kingdom. That is, it's actually the British who are more directly responsible, but they're a U.S. ally, and the U.S. in this case is using them to funnel money, kind of almost launder U.S. support for this genocide, so that the fingers aren't being pointed squarely at the United States. And the UK is itself kind of laundering money through Rwanda. Which, to explain it a little more, for those who know nothing about what I'm talking, Rwanda had their whole Rwandan genocide that happened a while back. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. And afterwards, some of the ethnic group that were responsible for carrying out the genocide fled to the eastern Congo. And then the British came in and helped, quote, rebuild Rwanda. Of course, what they really did is insert predatory multinational corporations and took over the economy of the country. The lives of Rwandans did not get that much better because a lot of the benefits of rebuilding went to the British corporations instead of the people of the country. Particularly, the British took control of a lot of the natural resources. And people in Rwanda were understandably angry about the attempted genocide, so they started sending militias and special forces and such into the eastern Congo to track down and kill initially just military officers who had been involved in the genocide, but then it extended into support for a genocide against the very ethnic group that had been trying to do the genocide. It would be like if after World War II people started trying to kill all Germans, an attempted genocide on the people who had attempted to do a genocide. And this got involved. The reason the UK got involved is because there's gold and diamonds in the eastern Congo, and the British want cheap access to those because they already had access, but they wanted it at dirt cheap conflict prices. So what ended up happening is the British intelligence services and like military black ops kind of stuff started funneling money into Rwanda. Rwanda then funneling money through equally kind of shady means into the eastern Congo, fueling a civil war in the Congo that more and more became genocidal in nature, with attempts to wipe out an entire ethnic group. And then the conflict led to very, very cheap sale of gold and diamonds from the eastern Congo to Rwandan-owned corporations, or really British-owned, often by militias aligned with Rwanda. So conflict prices. And the U.S. helped fund this stuff indirectly with like the CIA and State Department funding money to the British in ways that were meant to go into Congo so that the U.S. could get a slice of those natural resources too. The idea is to keep the entire Congo in conflict and weak. And then, like conflict diamonds, conflict gold. It's evil, and it should not be tolerated in any world that has any kind of rule of law, actual international law. But of course, it never applies to the U.S. somehow, or the UK. And so the U.S. and UK are doing genocide in the Eastern Congo indirectly through proxies, and it's not because the U.S. UK hates any of these groups. It's because there's natural resources at stake. It's vile. But I mean, the Indonesian genocide was supported by the U.S. State Department and the CIA because what had happened is there had been a failed communist coup in Indonesia. Then the United States helped put a far-right government in charge of Indonesia, and the Indonesian government went about killing anyone who was not only communist, but also socialist, trade unions, anyone even tangential related to the communists, so killing their whole families, extended families, hence a genocide. Over 1 million people were killed in the Indonesian genocide. So the U.S. backed that to make sure that communism would be completely crushed in Indonesia, and politics would align on the new political center would be very far to the right because the entire left was killed or made to live in fear, those who survived, and thus the very right-wing nature of politics in Indonesia led to very, very weak labor rights and easy exploitation of Indonesian labor and natural resources. The Bangladeshi genocide was because Bangladesh tried to break off of Pakistan, which was at the time led by a U.S. far-right fascist, really, puppet dictator that was providing the U.S. a very cheap access to labor and natural resources in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So the Bangladeshi independence movement was led in large part by an alliance of Democrats and communists. And so, same thing, the far-right government came in and tried to kill all the communists, all the Republicans, not just communists in this case, too, and whole ethnic groups that were disliked. And the CIA supported this. The U.S. military supported this indirectly, too. Well, not so indirectly. There was an attempt to put an arms embargo because the whole world was shocked by what was happening, kind of like Gaza. And there were cries for an arms embargo. And so the Soviets, who were still around at the time, because this was during the Cold War, decided they were going to enforce an arms embargo on Bangladesh, and their fleet was going to cut off any shipments by sea of weapons to Bangladesh or ammunition, which the way Pakistan was supplying their troops there was by sea. So they have no land connection except through India. And India was being pressured increasingly not allow any supplies or weapons by land. So the Soviet fleet came in and instituted a blockade to prevent weapons from entering Bangladesh because they're being used to carry out a genocide. And so the U.S. Navy went and confronted the Soviet Navy, and it almost broke out into shooting, which would have been World War III and the end of the world. The U.S. was willing to push it that far to support a genocide. So the U.S. was very much behind the Bangladeshi genocide, also was giving money to the Pakistani government such that pretty much their entire military budget came from the U.S., vast majority of it, which means that the weapons that were being used to carry out the genocide were being paid for by the United States. Kind of like how Israel gets a lot of bombs in the U.S., but even more clear-cut. So this is like now 4 ethnic cleansings, genocides the U.S. has been responsible for since the start of the Cold War. No one believes our shit anymore. The U.S. has lost all credibility and moral high ground, as it should. Any country that does this many genocides in the third world does not deserve to be taken seriously or get to claim that they're the good guys. The only reason that the Soviets didn't completely win the high ground is because the U.S. would always point fingers and say, Holodomor, and therefore the Bangladeshi genocide, the Indonesian genocide could be ignored because of that. Never mind that there's a lot less evidence that was planned from the top rather than carried out by local racists who, some cases, were put to death for what they did. That's not to say that there weren't genocidal bureaucrats in the Soviet Union, but that the ones who did, it could be proven that they'd intentionally starved people to death, were shot as punishment according to Soviet law. Like, what they did was illegal, and they were killed for murdering innocent people. Um, Unfortunately, some of the NKVD agents who also were involved got away because they were secret police, and so they got off scot-free, a lot of them. NKVD got away with so many crimes. They were rarely ever held accountable for anything evil they did, which is part of why they were eventually disbanded and replaced with the KGB, which wasn't much better, but it was a little better, which is to say the NKVD was horrendous, even worse than the KGB. But because of this, unfortunately, the U.S. carrying out 2 genocides in the Cold War was not enough to give all the moral high ground to the Soviets, even though if you look at the lives of ordinary people, the Soviets gave free health care, free housing, greatly subsidized food to everyone in the Soviet Union, and like worked to try and bring about the same policies in the Warsaw Pact, which, although these were puppet states of the Soviets, they weren't fully controlled. They had some autonomy, and different governments resisted some of these policies. There were, in order to maintain their control, the Soviets relied on sometimes corrupt middlemen, kind of governments that would collaborate with them, but were only willing to collaborate because they were able to like steal, and that's where there's some credibility in the idea that there was a kind of a kleptocratic class in the Soviet Union, not in the Soviet Union proper, but in the Warsaw Pact you do see some of this. It depends on the country. If I remember correctly, Bulgaria's government was relatively clean and supported by most of the people, but Romania's government was pretty corrupt, and Poland's government was the worst of, like, the worst. And in fact, Poland's the only country that's really done dramatically better since the fall of the Soviet Union. Most countries in Eastern Europe have actually done worse, or about the same, with even when they're doing about the same now. And they often really struggled when the Soviet Union fell, and only gradually got back to where they had been before. And some still haven't gone back to where they were before. The exception to this pattern is Poland, because their government that was there was so corrupt, and that's partly because the Poles were so nationalistic. The Soviets had a hard time finding people who were principled, who were willing to work with them, so they worked with thieves and murderers, because otherwise they feared Poland would like join NATO, leave the Warsaw Pact, and as kind of the capital of the Warsaw Pact, that would make the whole alliance fall apart, which would lead to the Soviets losing the Cold War. So they considered it a necessary evil, and it probably was given their strategic situation, but that's only because the U.S. started the Cold War against them. You know, you had Truman declaring his domino effect theory and his doctrine of attritional containment in the Soviet Union, and the Korean War, which was the U.S. essentially propping up a puppet state in South Korea that was undemocratic and illegal, because demands for peninsula-wide elections should have been heeded, and in a peninsula-wide election, the communists would have won. That's partly because most of the population at the time lived in the north, so the northerners were largely in favor of communism, and the southerners against. But you know, at the time, South Korea was just a rural hinterland with a lot of agriculture relative to the population, which is part of why North Korea had food problems, because their agricultural breadbasket ended up in the south, and then this area was urbanized and the population grew a lot under U.S. control, because breadbasket regions usually are providing food to cities and industrial centers, and that kind of tends to, in exploitative relationships in any country, like in the flyover states, the U.S. gets screwed by the urban centers, same thing. And this prevents their own population and industrial growth. When South Korea no longer was tied to the north, which, as it had been when Korea was United Peninsula, it started industrializing and urbanizing with U.S. help. And it actually grew slower than the north until like the 70s, and was lagging behind, but it did slowly develop. And after in the 80s, the South Koreans got rid of the military dictatorship that the U.S. had put in power there. It was a brutal authoritarian regime that the U.S. put in power because they argued it was necessary to contain communism or some bullshit. And then their economy took off because democracy is better for economic growth than far-right dictatorship, which is what South Korea had before, is a far-right dictatorship that used slave labor, concentration camps, secret police disappearing people, made all the worst things you can imagine, press censorship. The South Korean dictatorship did that, and it wasn't replaced by democracy until the 80s, even though the U.S. claimed that all the previous governments were democracies, and these governments called themselves republics, but it was purely a lie. They were military dictatorships that called themselves republics. It wasn't until the 80s that South Korea actually had a republic, despite the names of other governments that falsely claimed to be republics. At the same time, North Korea hit on hard times coming around the 80s with the Soviet Union weakening and eventually collapsing. And they relied on the Soviet Union for trade because the U.S. was keeping North Korea basically under sanctions and preventing any of the rest of Asia from trading with them. So the only trade partner they had was the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet economy went into deep recession in the 80s, they were in trouble. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost their only trade partner. And that, it's not because communism was bad. No, they struggled because all countries, socialist or capitalist, rely on trade to survive. Autarky is a bullshit theory that doesn't really work. No country is an island. Even an island, literally, needs to trade. And it doesn't mean you need completely free trade, but you definitely have to trade a lot to be prosperous and to meet your needs. And North Korea was in deep shit after they lost their main trading partner, and this led to a famine that the U.S. intentionally exacerbated by cutting off food aid when the world tried to send food to help with the famine. The U.S. government bought that food, and in fact worked to sabotage the North Korean agricultural system at the same time with like some subversive stuff, CIA operations at the same time, black ops. That there was a famine going on, which made the famine worse. It's heavily contested how impactful those activities really were. They may not have made much of an impact, but a lot of CIA ops don't actually work that well. But it does have symbolic value in terms of the U.S. was willing to try and make a famine worse, just to create regime change. What was probably more effective was cutting off the food aid. And that no one can deny the U.S. did. It's very out in the open and well recorded. Long story short, we're the bad guys if you're an American. Not us, the people. We didn't do it, really. Our government did it. They're the bad guys, the ruling class, the billionaires who have controlled the government more or less since the entire 20th century. In the 1920s, there's this guy, Smedley Butler, wrote a book, War is a Racket. And he wrote that in like the 20s, early 30s, and he argued then that the U.S. wasn't really a democracy, more it was an oligarchy controlled by the very rich, and that they were constantly invading countries. At that time, all over Latin America, the U.S. had been invading a lot of countries in the 80s and the 1910s and the 1900s, 1900s. Setting up puppet dictatorships and stuff. And he argued that that was really being done just for the interests of the rich and not for ordinary Americans, and that the U.S. wasn't really a democracy. And he was probably right. Then FDR came along in the Great Depression, and democracy saw a brief revival with the people of the U.S., the working class, kind of rallying and demanding change and getting rid of Hoover, who was a corrupt scumbag, though not nearly as corrupt as Coolidge, who came before him. And in bringing FDR, democracy saw a brief revival, saw New Deal policies, and then FDR died of, illness, and Truman was a sellout. He was really in bed with the corporations and stuff, and in fact had been picked as vice president by the Democratic Party ruling elite because he was so conservative and a sellout. Before that, there had been a different vice president that FDR had picked himself, um, who had been his Secretary of Agriculture. Names escape me right now, even though I've talked about him before. And this guy was very much cut from the same cloth as FDR and a strong champion of ordinary Americans and stood against the oligarchy. And he was pushed out in, I think it was 44, because Democrat Party elites knew FDR was going to die soon. So whoever was vice president would be the next president of the United States without an election, really. Um, and so they kind of did some shady backroom stuff. And even though the people wanted to pick this other guy at the Democratic convention, and most of the delegates initially were voting for him, not a large enough majority to pick him, but majority of delegates came to the convention supporting the guy who was competing with Truman for the nomination for vice president. And the party elites strongly pressured the delegates until most of them switched sides and ended up supporting Truman, and people were promised like advancement of their political careers, cushy jobs. It was very corrupt. And Truman, of course, was a rabid anti-communist, a racist, even though he integrated the U.S. military. It's kind of ironic. I mean, LBJ was a racist, and he was the one who got civil rights. There's a weird history in the U.S. of a really progressive leader dying and being replaced by someone who's much more racist, conservative, and actually that person advancing the cause of African Americans. You see it with LBJ, JFK. You see it with FDR, Truman. In both cases, FDR and JFK were more progressive, and their successors were racists who nonetheless carried on their legacy. Maybe out of respect for them. Well, I guess I went into politics in the end. But yeah, there's a lot of things people don't know. People don't study history in the U.S. because who's going to study it? Science majors? We're forced to spend most of our time on the sciences. I did take a couple history classes, but I had like advisors raising eyebrows asking why I was doing it. It's like, because I want to be a well-rounded human being, and I'm planning on applying medical school. It's important. When I mentioned the med school thing, they're like, oh, because I know med school's like history classes a little bit that you take in one or two. At least the more progressive med schools like it. History, literature, sociology, they like well-rounded human beings. But outside of pre-meds, it's heavily frowned upon for many science majors to take those kind of classes. And engineers never get the chance to take these kind of classes. They have such busy schedules. It's not really doable at all. You don't see business majors taking these kind of things unless they think a class is an easy A. The fact is very few Americans go to college, expand their knowledge of history beyond what they learned in high school. And in high school, you're full of hormones and stupid, and like sports and other stuff often crowd most Americans out from actually paying attention to history classes. They're taught not to care also that history is bunk, which is bullshit. So Americans don't know history. They never learn it. They develop a deep disdain for it, and even a disdain for the people who do bother to go out and learn as much as they can, like I have. I've faced so much nastiness from people who say, "Oh, this stuff is stupid. It's irrelevant. It's bullshit." From family members, even, "Oh, history. You're learning history. This is all bullshit." No, it's not. This is literally the stories of life and death and horrendous things that happen and good things that happen and wars. Nothing could be more impactful. Well, viewers, I'm done with this little bit of Cell Singularity. I'm just gonna do something here in the Beyond scene and then call it a night for this. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope my eventually rambling onto politics after saying I didn't have much on my mind, because I didn't, and then my thoughts wandered. As I started talking about stuff, I realized I did have something to say. I hope this wasn't bothersome or stressful or annoying. Uh, and I wish you all the best. Take care of each other, viewers. Be kind. And not just viewers, like take care of everyone in your lives, I'm saying. Dear viewers, be kind to yourselves. And may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Till next time, adieu.